Hello, this is Tim Haig. Now, if any of my subjects might have overawed me, it was John Mortimer, a great writer and a great lawyer, and always unerringly on the side of the angels. I had admired Mortimer for his advocacy from the Oz trial onwards, and I loved his creation of Horace Rumpole. But when I met him, far from being intimidating, he was charm itself. This interview is from 1995. Let's start talking about Rumpole himself. He's a sort of barometer, isn't he? You use him as a barometer of British life.
Yes, of course. People would say he's rather old-fashioned. I don't think there are any barristers much like that anymore because they can't speak English and they all use computers, and that colourful figure has rather gone out. So he is a sort of yardstick with which to judge the failures and the despondencies of our days, I suppose.
Do you see him as a sort of he's to the legal system what Yes Minister was to the political system?
No, because he's good, Rumpole. I mean, he's a good barrister. I mean, he's very clever. He's also a good person. I mean, he's decent. He's a standard of decency.
If he's such a good barrister,
why doesn't he earn more money? Yes,
and why isn't he a QC?
He isn't a QC because he thinks that's a lot of establishment nonsense. First, that's what he says, but the real reason he isn't a QC because he'd be too much trouble and he doesn't fit into the sort of establishment view of things. But he should really earn more money. But the great tradition of those good people like Philip Marlowe is that they wear dirty old trench coats and walk down mean streets and have hard-hearted wives like Hilda Rumpole. So I've got to make him suffer, really.
Oh, well, yeah, and you do.
Yeah.
Is there any part of John Mortimer letting off steam in Rumpole?
Oh, yes. I mean, he says all the things that I want to say, and if I say them, they sound rather sort of trendy and left-wing and unacceptable. And if he says them, they sound rather crusty and Tory and, win the public over. So he's very useful that way.
Do people ever make the mistake of confusing you with him?
Oh, they do a lot. I mean, I go to Australia and I go through the airport. They all say, "Good day, Rumpole." And I defended an East End totter. Went round with a pony and trap, nearly old iron, on a murder charge. And I was waiting with him in the cells for the jury to come back for a verdict. And he said, "Oh, your Mr. Rumpole could have won this case." He said, "I don't know why you couldn't." So he's not altogether an unmixed blessing to me.
What about Leo McKern? I mean, he's not going to be able to go on forever, is he?
No, he isn't, and I don't know whether we'll ever do any more televisions. But this is a book. He's inseparable in my mind with...
I was going to ask you that. Has Rumpole become more and more Leo McKern-like, as far as you're concerned? Because he certainly has the rest of us think of...
Well, I think visually he is entirely Leo, but his picture is on
the front of the book.
On the front of the book. But he wasn't my first thought. I mean, when I wrote the very first Rumpole, which was in the mid-70s, for the BBC, I thought Alastair Sim would be a very good Rumpole. And then I found that Alastair Sim was dead and couldn't take it on. So,
yes, you can see that being an inhibition.
Yeah, it was a bit of a drawback. So I think then we thought of Leo, and he's got everything that Rumpole is, I think secretly because he's Australian, and Australians have got absolutely no respect for authority of any sort, which Rumpole hasn't.
He's also a wonderful actor.
Oh, he is a magnificent actor.
Tell me about Rumpole's morals. I mean, would he get innocent people off? He has the good fortune that whenever he comes up with a really brilliant defence, and especially in this book, it turns out that he's right. But suppose he could get somebody innocent off.
Oh yes, well that frequently happens if you believe in the British system of justice, which I do and which Rumpole does. Because a British trial is not an exercise in finding out the truth, it's an exercise in finding out whether the prosecution have proved guilt beyond reasonable doubt. And there are many cases, and I think probably O.J. Simpson is one of them, in which someone may very well be guilty, but the prosecution evidence isn't sufficient to convict them. And if you're a defending barrister, you're never trying to prove your client's innocent. What you're trying to do is to say to the jury, are you absolutely certain on this evidence that they have to be guilty? So in those circumstances, many guilty people may be acquitted. But that, as even Lord Goddard, who was an old hanging judge, said, is much preferable to the idea of innocent people being put in prison.
As opposed to what Henry Root said, which is better that 10 innocent men should hang than that one guilty man should go free.
Absolutely, and these new breed of conservatives who are in favour of the death penalty say, no, I don't mind innocent people being hanged at all,
So Rumpole would have been happy to defend O.J. Simpson?
Oh yes, he would. I think he'd have done it a bit more quickly too. But I was terribly honoured that Rumpole was quoted in the O.J. Simpson trial, and one of the defence barristers said to Judge Ito, he said, as Mr. Rumpole says, we seem to be getting a case of premature adjudication, which is something that Rumpole does say. So I thought that was very plus for the O.J. Simpson trial.
Oh, I thought so too. In one of these stories, in Rumpole on the Way Through the Woods, he actually talks about his beliefs, doesn't he? Somebody says, do you have any genuine beliefs? And I think Rumpole says, as few as possible. Genuine beliefs get death threats. But the one is that he has to prevent the conviction of innocent people.
Yeah. And I think that's something which people are losing sight of, really, is that it's very important that innocent people shouldn't be locked into prisons. And therefore, it's very, very important that you don't have a death penalty, because you can never put it right.
Well, as would have been the case in several
with the
miscarriages.
NRA, yes, and the judge said, I wish you could all be hanged, and if they had been, you would have had a terrible miscarriage of justice.
Rumpole never prosecutes.
No, I didn't prosecute, but then I didn't used to do crime until I was accused. I did prosecute in one case. I prosecuted the railway police for the ticket collectors union. And what used to happen was that the railway police had a rather obnoxious habit of chaining Jamaican ticket collectors to the railings and rushing around in cowboy boots, bullying them. And of course, when I was prosecuting these railway policemen, all my defending instincts came to the fore, and they all got off. So I didn't try.
Is that right?
I didn't try it again.
I love the Timpsons, this family that Rumpole's always defending. I mean, he sees all of human life, doesn't he?
He does, and yes, exactly. And that's the thing about being particularly in criminal law. You have lunch with the judges and tea with the murderer, and then have a drink in the pub with the Timpsons. And I mean, I think what Rumpole realised is that the good, honest, what they call ODC, which is ordinary decent crime, keeps the whole system going.
Yes, because Rumpole doesn't dislike the Timpsons, does he?
Not at all. No, I mean, and all the beef and Pomeroy's plonk in Gloucester Road, is dependent on the efforts of the Timpsons, because if they didn't commit any crimes, there wouldn't be any barristers or any judges, or there wouldn't be Michael Howard, which might be a benefit to the human race, but there you go.
Say not such a thing. The great and good Michael Howard. Yeah. You've broken the mould in this book of stories as well, as everybody has pointed out, by having Hilda narrate a story.
Well, I know, and I found that there is a Jeeves story which is told by Jeeves instead of Bertie Wooster. It's not a terribly good one, but at least it's interesting. So I thought, well, maybe there should be a story told by Hilda. And I've become very fond of Hilda, and in the Rumpole Society in San Francisco, they have Hilda Rumpole lookalike contest. She's become a sort of icon. And so I thought she should say what she thought of
like
Rumpole.
Having a Nora Batty lookalike society. Who'd want to enter?
Exactly. But she's quite keen on sex, Hilda, really.
Well, that's right. Unsuspected depths of passion and currents in Hilda, which come to the fore in this sort of brief encounterish story of hers.
Yes, that's right. And poor old Rumpole, his experience of sex wouldn't fill one long wet weekend, really, in Weston-super-Mare, but, Hilda's quite keen on it.
They have a son. They have a son.
They do. I've rather forgotten him. They did have a son. He went off to America to teach, and I never found his character enormously interesting.
But it's useful, isn't it? Because it makes it clear that Rumpole is not a virgin, even if he's not interested in sex.
This is true. And he has been in love. He has sort of had people he's rather fancied.
There's a rare moment in the last story, in Rumpole and the Angel of Death, which is, of course, the title story here, in which Rumpole actually hates his job and minds that he's nailed one of the witnesses and forced her to confess. And
yes.
That's very unusual for Rumpole. I mean, it's as though he's getting tired.
Yeah, well, I suppose, sort of humanity takes over in our declining years. Yes, I suppose when you're young, the sort of rough and tumble and cutthroat and all that is very, very exciting. And it still remains exciting to him. But yes, I think it's quite nice that it's like Shakespeare's last plays, a sort of general benevolence can take over.
Will you ever tire of Rumpole?
I don't know. I mean, I've written, that's about the 10th Rumpole book. But he is, I think the reason why he keeps alive for me is that you can address all the problems like fox hunting, which people get so emotional about, like selling stories to the newspapers.
Or euthanasia. I mean, all these things are covered in this book.
Are all happening. So that while wildlife is throwing up these ridiculous controversies, I think that there's always a use for Rumpole.